primarily the betrothal, which happens 1 year before, talking historically here. Because today, the betrothal and the marriage are all put together at the same time. But one of them, the betrothal part, is called Kiddushin. You read that, Kiddushin, Harrison, remember? And Kiddushin means to make holy, and to make holy means to make separate or different or to raise up. The idea in Judaism of marriage is that you take your partner and set them apart, literally on a pedestal, apart and special from everybody else. And if you don't understand that part of it, you'll never understand Jewish marriage. There's a Yiddish saying which is, if the wife you marry is small, bend down to her and whisper all. The idea is, they can work the other way as well, the idea is that you go to whomever you have married and treat them in a very special way just to you. Okay? So that's the basic concept. Now, in ancient times, marriage occurred in different ways. Polygamy in Judaism was very common. The ban on polygamy, which it ran out. It ran out about 3 or 4 years ago. There was a ban in the Middle Ages for 1,000 years of no polygamy as a tribe. It never ran out. But guess what? Obviously, Jews today, everywhere in the world, are not involved in polygamy anymore. So I don't think there's any reason that one would expect it to come back. But it's marriage is to one person, and in ancient times, and more so in the Middle Ages, the concept of a shotgun came into being. I explained to you what happened to me. Did I tell you that story of what happened to me on Simchat Torah in Brooklyn in the Hasidic part? I didn't tell you that story. Let me, just to give you an idea. I was a first-year rabbinical student, 21 years old, not dating Donna yet, not dating anybody, and I wanted to go to a Hasidic shtibel. Now, a Hasidic shtibel is a place where very Orthodox Jews, the ones with the payas and the sideburn, all of that, where they go and the men dance together and it's very joyous and the women are off to the side. And I wanted to go because I wanted to see that. I hadn't seen it in Texas. And it was truly amazing, but it really got very hot in that little synagogue. So I went out to the Parkway in Brooklyn and sat on a bench, on a park bench right in the middle. And there was a young lady sitting on the bench, and I figured she was probably Jewish since I was right in the middle of Hasidicville. And I started a conversation with her, and shortly into it I thought, well, you know, maybe she'd like to go for a Coke or something, so I invited her. Whoa, I thought she was going to kill me. She says, what do you mean? She said, I can't go on a date if it hasn't been set up by a shadchan, by a matchmaker. I don't know that you're suitable for me. You don't know that I'm suitable for you. Our lineage hasn't been studied. Our parents' lineage hasn't been studied. I don't know what you do. You don't know what I do. And all of that has to be arranged. And all of the Hasidic rabbis in town today, they are married to their wives because it was arranged through a shadchan. They had a marriage broker come to them, to the men, and say, we have the following 3 women who we think would be appropriate to marry you as a rabbi. They're very pious, they're very observant, they come from the homes of rabbis in many cases. There's a whole list of things that make them suitable. So they, is it hot in here? No. So they bring them together, and shotgun present, so they're not by themselves. The two of them say hello to each other and talk to each other. They've been informed about each other's background that's been adequately checked out. And if they liked talking with each other, then they can arrange for another date, but with the shotgun there again. Then they would have a dinner together and they would talk. And if they still like talking to each other, then they can arrange a third date with no shotgun present, but public, where once again they would have dinner and they would talk. And if they then still liked each other after those 3 times, they would then inform the shotgun, the marriage broker, that they did like each other, this looked like it could be a good match, and the marriage would be arranged. And that's it, and it's a done deal. Now, today, given the fact that 2/3 of all marriages end in divorce, it's not a bad system. They couldn't do any worse, depending on how you look at it. But my point is that still today in the Orthodox community, this is what happens. In ancient times, there were 3 ways to get married within Judaism. Either with a shtar, which is a document, as you're going to hear in a minute, ketubah, the marriage contract, or through kesef, which is something, metal of value, a ring or a coin, which would be exchanged. And the third is bia, or intercourse. In other words, if a couple said, we're going into this room to 2 witnesses to have intercourse for the purpose of marriage, and the witness saw them go in and come out, then in that case they were considered legally married. Now, obviously that has changed today, especially with regard to civil law, but that still is on the books as one of the 3 ways that couples marry today. In a Jewish wedding, what happens is before the wedding, the ketubah is signed. Ketubah comes from the Hebrew word katab, or to write. And what this is a legal document. Now really, there are 2 legal documents leading up to marriage. The first legal document occurs 1 year before, and that was before the 2, marriage and engagement, were brought together as one. And that was simply called a shtar. And in that particular document, the groom's father agreed to compensate the bride's family, particularly her father, for the loss of work that she was doing for her father. Or the groom agreed to go and work for the father in order to compensate for the loss of the labor of the daughter. And the 2 would agree, the 2 fathers would agree, and then they would have a cup of wine. They would sign the shtar, the document, and they would drink from the wine cup to show that the deal was sealed. So in a Jewish wedding today, the first time you drink from a cup of wine is when it symbolizes that particular engagement. Now, a ketubah was then drawn up during that year. There, a woman was then, the wife was purchased by her husband. The purchase price was determined by her virginity. If she was a virgin, her father would receive 200 zuz. I don't know what a zuz was, but it was a significant amount of money. If she was either a divorcee or a widow, she only received 50 zuz because her value was not as great. And when all of this occurred, it was written into the contract, into the ketubah. So in a real Orthodox ketubah today, the verbiage in the Aramaic and in the English, if it's translated directly, literally, you have to put in there if she's a virgin or not. Now, most of the time today, the rabbi simply assumes she is, and they put that in there, and they put in the 200 zoos. In ancient times, it was very, very important to know that for sure. Now, why is that in there? This is her money. And you've often heard that women have a lesser role and are treated as second-class citizens within Judaism compared to men. And in Jewish law, actually, I don't think you can argue against that. I mean, the law, if you literally follow it, does put Jewish women in a second-class kind of place. But the ketubah gave her something that no other religion or culture gave women in the time that it has been, when it was invented. That 200 zuz could be used by her either if her husband died, it was her life insurance. If her husband divorced her, it was her alimony. If she wanted to start a business, it was her collateral that she could take to the bank and use for a loan. So it was very important, obviously, within Jewish law to make sure that she was provided for in terms of her financial status should any of these things happen to her. Now, there was another part of this that's very interesting, and that's called chalitza. In your reading, you all had that. Who can tell me what chalitza is and what it was related to? Chalitza. Anybody? If a Jewish woman was married, she and her husband had no children, and her husband died. In that particular case, she did not get any of her husband's family's inheritance. She got her bride price, she got her 200 zuz if she was a virgin, but she didn't get any of his particular wealth. If they had children, then his wealth would have gone to the children. Jewish law says that her husband's brother, at least one of them, has to offer to marry her, in which case then she then again has access to his wealth because of the fact that she's now married to her brother, her brother-in-law. The problem is, what if she didn't want to marry her brother-in-law? What if her brother-in-law didn't want to marry her? They had something called chalitza, in which in public she would she would undo a shoe and in public kick her shoe off at him and then spit on him. Now, needless to say, it made her do things that were not very comfortable in public and not very ladylike. So she was forcing her to think twice or three times or four times to decide if in fact it was worth all that to not have to marry her brother-in-law. On the other hand, what if the brother-in-law didn't want to marry her? Now think about this. If the brother-in-law doesn't marry her, what happens for her and her husband's wealth, his estate? She doesn't get it. So we got a problem. Namely, the brother-in-law says, to heck with that. I'm not going to marry her. What do I need to share the wealth? I'm going to keep it all in my family. When that happens, not only does she not get the wealth, but on top of it, even worse what happens is that she can't remarry. She's an aguna. She is tied to him and is tied for life. So the rabbinic court has come in and done all kinds of things to him. Put him in jail, in the Middle Ages, shunned him, pushed him out of the public eye. He couldn't socialize in the Jewish community, couldn't do business in the Jewish community. It's still a problem today. The other problem is if her husband dies and no one can find where his body is, and they don't know for sure, she's an aguna then too.